All right. So tonight's presentation is on the forecaster's funnel. And some folks went, well, what the heck? Why is it called a funnel? And what's the deal? Basically, all the forecaster's funnel is it's a way of looking at weather and forecasts and starting with the big picture and narrowing down to the local picture, and kind of looks like a funnel. So that's why it's called the forecaster's funnel. Now I just lost my cursor. There it is. So I'm just going to have a little teeny PowerPoint presentation to start, kind of like usual. And then what's going to happen after that is we're going to go live online to the web, and I'm going to take you through a super fast version of the funnel. And it's basically all just looking at various links to sites on the internet. And I know I'm going to get a million questions about, can we get a copy of the links? And the answer is yes. If you attend the webinar and you want a copy of all of the links that were shown during the webinar, I'll send them to anybody who wants them. I'll make a little PDF file. So all you have to do is just click on the links and you can go to all these places. And I fully appreciate that everybody will develop their own little funnel, their own little set of favorite websites that they want to visit with weather and that sort of stuff. And that's totally cool. I'm not necessarily saying you have to use the ones that I use. They're just some of the ones that I've found useful. And I did find that I had to actually pare it down and scrub some of the ones out that I'm used to using in a professional operation, because we're not going to be flying a helicopter. So we're probably not going to look at any of the stuff from Navigation Canada, although there is some useful stuff there on the Nav Canada website. And I've taken out any of the 4-panel diagrams and so on and so forth for the real weather nerds. And I've just boiled it down to the stuff that's going to be more or less useful for everybody. All right. So just by way of disclosure, this presentation isn't sponsored by the ACMG or the CAA or Avalanche Canada. And all of the mistakes and inaccuracies that might be showing up in this presentation belong to me, and I'll take ownership for them. And none of the materials being presented today are proprietary by any of those agencies. This is all kind of put together by me. The inspiration for this particular presentation was from an ACMG and Canadian Avalanche Association continuing professional development session that I attended by one of the MSC forecasters who creates the mountain weather forecast for Avalanche Canada. And I thought, well, why should only guides and CAA professionals have access to this information? And I started including a forecaster's funnel in some of the Avalanche update courses that I ran for the Calgary section for a number of years. So yeah, I was inspired by a forecaster to include it. And we do something like this on the industry training programs for people who are interested in working in the avalanche field or becoming avalanche professionals. I recognize probably 80, maybe 90% of the names of the people who've been attending these webinars. And so most of you know I've been an ACC member since about 1975. One or two of you, like Rick Checkland, I have known since 1975. I think Rick has been running the Summer in the Mountain program for probably, well, definitely since then, because I took it from him back in those days. So been around with the ACC for a while. I'm a professional member of the Canadian Avalanche Association, and I teach their industry training programs, which are the professional courses. I also teach AST courses, but I teach the ITP Level 1, Level 2, and AVSAR courses for professionals for the CAA. And I've been a member of the ACMG since 1981. And as I said yesterday, all of these affiliations plus $2, and I can get a coffee at Tim Hortons. So that's just some of the agencies that I have been hanging out with for quite a while. So tonight's program, we're just going to look at a bunch of the resources available on the net that are going to facilitate your planning for winter ski touring and other stuff as well, snowshoeing, hiking in the winter, that sort of stuff. snowboarding for that matter. I'll include that in there. It says ski touring, but we don't have a better word that is more inclusive yet, or at least I don't know it. And we'll just kind of go through some of the websites that I look at really quickly every single morning when I'm going out ski touring or guiding, and just to kind of keep my head in the sky and keep my head in the snow. So what we're going to do here in a minute is we're going to start not quite with the global scale. Often I'll start by taking a look at what's going on with the jet stream. And what we're actually going to do in the demo here is we're going to take a look first at the big picture, the Western Canada satellite imagery, and just see what is going on. And we're going to be doing the real-time stuff. We're not looking at phony makeup stuff. We're going to be looking at the real thing as it sits right now. Fortunately, southern Alberta just got hammered. And so there is something to actually look at, and we'll see what's coming down the pipe at us. And then we'll move on to a little bit more regional information, and then we'll tunnel into the local picture, and then we'll end by looking at local real-time data if possible. That's kind of the funnel. You look at the big picture, then the regional picture, and then more local. And then if you can somehow find some local data, take a look at that just before you head out. And when you're looking at all these weather forecasts and stuff, what you really need to do is also look at it in the context of the avalanche bulletin and say to yourself, does it actually make sense? Because for those of us who recreate in Jasper Park, Banff Park, Yoho Park, Kootenay Park, Glacier Park, the avalanche forecast, the avalanche bulletins are actually written the night before. So all they know is what the forecast was for our day of travel. They don't actually have access to the morning data when they create their forecast, which is a little different from what a lot of professional operations do. When I worked heli skiing, and last winter was my last winter of heli skiing after 30 years, we would always make a nowcast at the end of our workday, and then our forecast we would do on the morning we go out. The way parks issue their bulletin is a little different. They give us their forecast the night before, so they might not know that it snowed 40 centimeters when the forecast was only for 20. So they may have to update their bulletin if things have really dramatically changed, although that doesn't often happen. Okay, so what's the first stuff we look at? Well, often I'll look at what's going on in the upper level flow. And I'm just going to do a tiny bit of education here. I really struggled with how far to go with this stuff when I was putting this presentation together. I thought, should I really talk about fronts? Should I talk about what an occluded front is? Should I talk about the jet stream? Should I talk about all of these weather things? And I went, no, I'm not going to talk about El Nino and La Nina and all that other kind of stuff. I'm just going to talk about some of the big picture stuff that you might see when you're looking at the weather data that I'm going to present, and give you some ideas of what you think when you see different things. Okay, so you'll look at the upper level flow and see what's going on. When there is a westerly flow, which is quite common, all right? Often when we have a pure westerly flow, there's significant precip and we have relatively steady freezing levels. They don't bounce up and down. They're not going to drop into the toilet. They're not going to raise into the ceiling. And often there, with a westerly flow, the systems move pretty fast. So sometimes they get the forecast right, but they get the timing wrong. It shows up a little earlier or a little later than they predict. And in a westerly flow, it tends to be stormy. Okay, westerly flow. And when you read the Avalanche Canada weather forecasts, and we'll look at those, they'll often call westerly flow a zonal flow. Okay, so if you see the term zonal flow, it just means it's predominantly a westerly flow, probably going to get some precip coming down the pipe at us. Now, what about if the flow is coming down from the northwest? We had a northwesterly flow a ton this summer. A lot of chilly weather. Well, for where I was anyways, I was in Jasper a bunch when I was out, once I kind of took myself off self-quarantine. And usually northwesterly flows are cold and moist, but with a northwesterly flow, where you get the most precip is over the coast ranges, not necessarily over the Rockies, or sorry, over the southern Rockies. into Jasper and Banff. And I realized Jasper isn't really the Southern Rockies. All right. You get lower freezing levels and you get extremely variable precip with a northwesterly flow. And this is sometimes called the skier's flow, because if you're lucky enough to be where it does snow, since the temps are cooler, you often get these big dumps of fluffy snow, but it's hit and miss. One place might get it, another place just down the pipe doesn't get it. So the precip can vary from place to place in a northwesterly flow. Cooler, drier a little bit than with a zonal flow, but pretty good for skiing. How about a southwesterly flow? Well, this is when we tend to get higher precip over all of the ranges, and this is when the freezing levels go up. In other words, at 3,000 meters, the temperature might be 0, and it might actually be raining down in the valley. And the southwesterly flow, typically a wet, stormy period, and this is when it's purely southwesterly, and you look at where the flow is coming from, often it's coming straight from the Hawaiian Islands, and that's where the term Pineapple Express comes from. If you look at what's southwest of us, it's Hawaii. And these days, instead of calling it a Pineapple Express, when there's a ton of moisture in the atmosphere and it's coming at us from the southwest, they'll often refer to it as an atmospheric river as well. Why? Because there's just a schwack of moisture in the upper atmosphere. All right. So now how about a pure southerly flow? We don't get that all that often. Tends to be warmer and drier. We tend to get valley fog. Temperature inversions can occur. In other words, it's warmer on the summits than it is down in the valleys. And initially, we can get the warm air kind of overriding Arctic air that's trapped in the valley, and it can result in some pretty heavy snowfalls initially. All right. How about a pure northerly flow? Well, I once worked in a place called Lac La Biche, which is a couple hours north of Edmonton, and I loved the northerly flow because it was freaking cold, and you'd drive your car to work with square tires because it would be minus 45. So with the northerly flow, we tend not to get much moisture because there is no moisture really north of us in the winter. So there's little or no snowfall, cooler temps. And when we use the term upslope, it means that air is rising up on mountains. So with a northerly flow, sometimes the eastern side of the coast mountains and Vancouver Island are where you might get some snow because that's where the air is being forced up. But there tends not to be a ton of moisture in a northerly flow. And when the pattern shifts, sometimes you get some snow down to sea level. All right, so it tends to be very cold, very dry. And if you're on the West Coast, outflow winds are winds that are going out into the ocean in the coastal valleys and inlets. So we don't have to worry about that. So let's just do a quick synopsis here. All right, here we go. Back. All right, westerly flow. This is kind of our normal pattern where we're getting a bunch of our precip. All right, steady freezing levels, lots of precip. Northwesterly flow, it's kind of more patchy and tends to be a little cooler. But if you are where the snow is, often it's really good snow. It's that skier's flow. Southwesterly flow, the Pineapple Express or the atmospheric river. This is when we sometimes get rain way up to higher elevations or even mountaintop. Southerly flow, warmer, drier. Sometimes you get some heavy snow initially. Northerly flow, just freaking polar outbreak and freaking cold. Okay, so a couple of quick rules of thumb here for us. When we're looking at weather stuff, how much precip is important when we're looking at precipitation forecasts? Well, from your avalanche courses, you probably know about 3 centimeters an hour or 2 millimeters of precip for a few hours in a row. Probably you're going to get some direct action avalanches. And just like just occurred in the Rockies, 25 centimeters or more, or 20 millimeters of precip or more in 12 hours usually ends up with a big spike in the avalanche hazard, like just happened. And you'll find that forecasters tend to talk about millimeters of precip as opposed to centimeters of snow, because millimeters of precip is really a better indicator of how much load is being put on the snowpack. If you're wondering why I included millimeters. They even call it millimeters when it's snow. What is the water equivalent of the snow that fell? And when we have persistent weak layers, which we do have this year, 40 centimeters or 30 millimeters of precip total on a persistent weak layer is probably going to end up with some avalanche problems. And if you look at what just happened in the Rockies, everything went to high, high, high. Why? Well, we had 40 centimeters of precip. The next one probably only matters to you if you're a forecaster. If you have a significant percentage of the total amount of water in your snowpack falling out of the sky, you find that really deep, weak layers wake up. That's probably not a big deal for you. That's more a big deal for a forecaster. How much wind is going to cause us problems? Well, moderate winds, as you probably know from your avalanche courses, 25 to 40 kilometers an hour. Those are really the ones that are good for slab formation. And that's when in the lee, you'll get 2 to 5 times the amount of snow loading up on the lee slopes than fell out of the sky, sometimes as much as 10 times as much. I remember when I worked at Marmot Basin, we had an event where the lee side was definitely more than 10 times what was on the windward side, and we had a massive cycle of avalanche activity. I started a size 4 with a little tiny explosive inbounds. So how about temperatures? Well, how warm is too warm? Anytime the air temp is approaching 0, or if we get anything more than 3 centimeters an hour rise in temperature as it's approaching 0, you got to think that something's going to happen. Very occasionally, you'll find that a rapid drop in temperature will cause some stuff to happen. It's an odd phenomenon, not well understood. More research to be done. Okay, so that was just to kind of give you the big overview of what am I looking at, what am I thinking about when I look at the big picture. We're going to go online. Okay, so here we are. I'm going to take you through a typical series of websites that I might go through first thing in the morning when I'm about to go out on the day of ski touring or even ice climbing or snowshoeing or anything like that. Okay, so I boot up my browser, and I'm just going to go to full screen here so it's a little bit bigger for you. And right now I'm using Google Chrome. You can do this with most browsers. In Google Chrome, you can basically tell the computer or tell the browser what pages you want to open when you actually start your browser. And so I usually use Safari for my day-to-day browsing, but I use Google Chrome for all my avalanche stuff, because as soon as I start Google Chrome, boom, a whole bunch of pages all open up at the same time. So I'm just going to close the Rescue Dynamics one. That's just some shameless advertising. And here we go. This is typically the first page that I look at. And what have we got here? Well, it's basically an infrared image, all right, overlaid on the Pacific Ocean, and you're looking at BC and Alberta kind of right in the sweet spot. And for those of you down in Calgary, you can probably see my cursor wobbling around kind of on the right-hand side of center screen. This is that big impulse that just nailed you folks with a bunch of snow down south. Central Alberta kind of got missed. Nakiska had, 43 centimeters overnight with this storm. And you can see it's drifting away and then just about to hit the northern part of BC in the kind of northern tip of the island maybe is another big impulse. Now, if you look down where my cursor is, right where it says 160 degrees west at the bottom of the screen, what I'm circling there, those little purple dots, those are the Hawaiian Islands. So when the flow is coming direct from Hawaii, which it's not really, there's a little bit of a southwesterly flow here. That looks like could be the start of an atmospheric river if it starts running this way and really picking up a lot of moisture. All right, so we're kind of in a westerly, southwesterly flow. Cool. Now, and I usually only look at this for a couple of seconds just to get kind of the big picture. It looks like what's going to happen in the Rockies here, where most of us are. It looks like, and this is real time, right? Boom, the last image ends essentially an hour ago. It looks like we're about to get into a bit of a dry period before that next thing hits the coast, and it's a ways off from us. And then I look at what's going on in the water vapor, all right? So this is another satellite image. The infrared is really the temperature of the cloud tops. That's what that's all about. It's not really the moisture, it's more the temperature of the cloud tops, but that's okay. That's semantics. All right. And where you see the kind of browny areas and the black areas, there's not a lot of moisture. Where you see the kind of darker colors and the greens and the oranges and stuff like that, that's moisture. So you can see that in the past, what caused all that snow for Calgary? Just look at where the cursor is there. You go, that was it. There were cold cloud tops and a lot of moisture. Why did you get snow? But it looks like there's now a period where it's drying out a little bit. We'll see if that's borne out in the forecast. So what do I do next? All right. And I'm not going to read everything in detail. I'm just going to show you a bunch of stuff. And then if you're interested in getting the links, you can get the links. And I would say on a COVID cold Tuesday, you should just play around with all of these websites and find the stuff that really makes sense to you. So you've probably all gone to Avalanche Canada for the Avalanche Bulletin, and under Backcountry Resources, there's the mountain weather forecast. You click on the mountain weather forecast and what comes up? This does, all right? So this is today's. It was issued at 4 o'clock in the morning. I can refresh it and see if they've given us an update, but they probably haven't. Yep, still issued at 4 o'clock in the morning, so that's pretty normal. The 4 o'clock forecast comes out 4 o'clock Pacific time, and they give you a little bit of a synopsis here. That's the first little bar, and they basically tell you what's going on. And now, what we see here, the imagery we see here, the previous two images we looked at were satellite images that were what had just happened in the hours prior. What we're looking at now is a computer forecasting what's going to happen in the hours coming up in the next day or 2 or 3. And when I look at this, I can see 4 o'clock this morning, there was still a bunch of moisture that the computer was forecasting was going to be kicking around Calgary. And then I bump it up to 10, still there. And then when I bump it to 4 in the afternoon, it looks like it's starting to vacate. And I bump it to around now, and the computer's saying, well, it should be drying out in Calgary by now. The other thing that I notice when I'm looking at this, you see these contours. These are the 500 millibar contours. Doesn't matter if you know what they are, all right? But basically, they're iso hips. They're not iso bars. They're basically the height of the 500 millibar level. Who cares? Semantics, all right? But you see it kind of is forming what looks like it's a ridge. And guess what? That is a ridge. It's a ridge of high pressure. So the fact that we saw in the previous satellite images a clearing coming, well, it looks like the computer model is saying that clearing is going to come. And it's kind of moving towards us in the Rockies. The precip that we saw kind of floating up in that somewhat southwesterly flow looks like it's going to slam the northern part of BC. And this is basically a computer guessing what's going to happen. You always want to take a look at what they tell you in the synopsis because they give you the kind of big overall picture. And then I usually click on day 1 and day 2, even if I'm just going out for a day. And now, when you look at day 1, all of a sudden I can't click through this and I can't scroll through this, in 6-hour intervals. It's like, what's going on here? This is just static, 4 o'clock in the morning. Well, basically, when you see this big H in the upper part of the diagram and the big H in the lower part of the diagram and a ziggy-zaggy line connecting the two, that ziggy-zaggy line is basically telling you that a forecaster is telling you there's a ridge of high pressure there. And you look in the lower right corner of this diagram and there's a little red L. That's a low pressure system. So there was a low that was moving through kind of southern Alberta that brought that snow with us. The forecaster wrote these words. The computer didn't. The forecaster was saying the snow was going to end and then it was going to be windy. And then on the coast, it was going to be mainly clear. These little red bumpy things, those are warm fronts. So that means the air is moving from south to north there. These little spikies, the blue spikies, that's a cold front. And usually they are circulating like that. And so sometimes, and I don't know if we have one, sometimes you'll see a warm front and a cold front connected with a weird little jaggy line. And that means that basically the cold front has caught up to the warm front and pushed warm air up top, and it's called an occlusion. And there's tons of good resources for learning about these things on the net. But I would say just kind of learn what these symbols mean. Warm air coming up here, cold air coming down here, looks like precip here, ridge of high pressure behind it. And they give you a quick verbal statement about what they think is going to happen. So upslope snowfall will continue this morning with additional accumulations of 10 to 15 centimeters likely in the Kananaskis. That was them talking about this morning. And then they'll give you a synopsis for this afternoon. Skies will clear overnight across the Rockies. Northwesterly winds will develop ridgetop level in the northern Rockies. All right, so that ridge is still there. Oh, here we go. On the upper left corner, you see there's a low pressure system. Things are going to be swinging around there. When you see lows and you look at satellite images, you'll sometimes see the clouds almost look like they're shaped like a comma. So here we have a warm front, here we have a cold front, and in this part here, the cold front has caught up to the warm front and pushed warm air aloft there. This area here is sometimes referred to as the triple point, and sometimes right in around there is when you're going to get a ton of precipitation. What are we going to get in Alberta? Not a lot. Okay. So then what do? Even if I'm not going out for 2 days, I usually look at what's happening the day after, because sometimes things move faster than the forecasters think. So Wednesday, that is actually tomorrow in our real world here, they're showing the ridging. There's our ridge of high pressure. Doesn't look like precip for us in the Rockies. Does look like there's going to be snow right near the triple point of where this warm front and the cold front bump into each other, and then it occludes up in here. Okay. So you'll read what they're saying and telling you what's going on, and then tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock, there's a chance of snow way north in BC, but mainly sunny for us here in Alberta. Okay. So now, these are kind of my pretty much all the time go-tos. If I'm out for a longer time or I want to know what's going on, I'll go into day 3 and 4. And day 3 and 4 are purely computer-generated imagery. Day 1, all these letters are, and all the terms and words written on here, written by a human being. Day 2, all the words and all the big letters and all the fronts are written by a human being. Day 3 and 4, it's a computer telling you what's going on. All right, so now the forecaster will give you an idea of what they believe. So, and you can step through this like before, and you're just stepping through the various computer-generated images. Okay, so now, depending upon whether I'm expecting precip or not, I might click on the precipitation graph to see what's going on. Doesn't look like there's much precip happening for us. And I can step through this in 6-hour intervals, and you go, you know what? There's not going to be any snow for us in the Rockies. And then I can look at winds, and I can look at temperatures. I can look at radar. And when things are actively snowing is when I'll actually look at the radar image and just kind of see upslope of us, if it's a westerly flow, how much precip is already hitting just upslope of us. Or if it's a northwesterly flow, I'll look at what's going on in kind of the northern part of the Rockies. They get us really good satellite imagery here. This is the equivalent to the infrared thing that I started with. I prefer the one that I start my day with. It shows me a little bit more of what's coming at me from the coast. And I like the graphics better, to be honest. All right, whoops. Boink. So I would advise you to just play around with all of these things. As you play around with some of them, you'll find that there are tutorials that you can click on, and you can learn about what's going on and in these various maps and stuff like that. We definitely don't have time to go through it today because I have a tendency to go way overboard when I'm doing these webinars. Okay, so Avalanche Canada's mountain weather forecast, spend hours playing with it so that you can just spend minutes playing with it when you're about to go out. Now, A program that I've only started using in the last few years is called Windy, and it's rapidly become probably one of my favorite programs. And you can basically figure out what you want to see. Do you want to see winds? Do I want to see winds at the surface? I can slide up a slider and say, do I want to see winds at upper elevations? And you can see they're booking it there. I can scroll a little scroll bar down. There's about 3,000 meters or 10,000 feet. This is what's happening with the winds. The color helps you out. I can get the computer to forecast what's going to happen over the next week or more. Actually, it's about 10 days with what's going on with the winds. And Windy is another one where if you're going to get any good with it, you have to play with it. Can I get satellite imagery with Windy? Yep, I can overlay satellite imagery if I want. I don't like the satellite imagery on Windy so much, or the radar, but I do like some other things. And I'm just going to show you some stuff that I've looked at recently. You can go up into the left-hand corner into where it says search location, type in the name of a place. So let's take a look at Banff Village Cam, Sunshine Village. Okay, so little sidebar came up, and basically they're showing me a bunch of the webcams. And yeah, I know I can get the webcams just by going to the Sunshine website, but it's very convenient to have a bunch of weather stuff and a bunch of webcams all in one place. So I just clicked on the 24-hour snowboard at Sunshine, and just for curiosity, we're going to watch and see what happened. And this can be really helpful in the morning because they had a light on this all night. And I'm just going to watch. You notice it started at about 13 centimeters, and you notice where it's ending. You notice it settled a bit and then went. So it goes down, then back up. Okay, so here we are in the morning. Boom, 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 boom. And so rather than listening to a news report on the radio where you don't really believe when they say, oh, we got 35 centimeters overnight, you can actually check for real and look at the snowboards, look at the storm board. And you do have to look at where it started from. A storm board will sometimes not be cleared for a couple of days. You usually wait until a storm has been gone for a day or so before you actually clear the storm board. And so, yeah, a whole bunch of webcams. Now, what else can I do? Well, I can look at things like Banff town site. And when I typed in Banff for the town site, I've got a week's worth of forecasts for the town site, roughly. And I can also click on, are there any webcams in the vicinity of Banff? So it's kind of an attempt to give you one-stop shopping. You can kind of look at what's going on, real-time imagery in Banff, or as close to real-time as you can. With most of these, you can actually get a 24-hour boom, 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 and just watch what's going on and see how much snow. It snowed right in the town site. Not as helpful for us out in the hills, but it just gives us an idea of what's going on. Okay, what else can you do with Windy? All kinds of crap. You can, let me just go to new snow. I'll click on new snow here. And you'll notice that I've got down in the left-hand corner, clicked the next 12 hours, how much new snow is expected in Banff? About 2 centimeters. I can go to Lake Louise, and I'm just going to close that. And I can click on Lake Louise, and it's saying, well, in the next 12 hours in Lake Louise, only about 0.7 centimeters. So wherever you put your cursor and click, I can just pick a random place. It's going to give me a computer-generated amount of predicted new snow. So Windy is super cool. Probably take you a couple of days of playing around with Windy to learn all the features. Down in the lower right corner, you can get different computers or different computer models to generate the information for wind and rain and snow and all of that kind of stuff. I like the fact that you can just click in a search term and it'll take you to that place and give you a bit of a forecast for that place. All right, what else? Well, you all know about the bulletin, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. I noticed that the color in the bulletin has changed dramatically since this morning. Banff Yoho, Kootenay were all in the red in high this morning, and so the forecast has dropped. And also here, all these little blue bubbles, I'm sure you're aware, those little blue bubbles are either MCR or MIN reports from various people. So I can click on that little bubble. Somebody's what, Helen Shoulder yesterday, spelt it wrong, doesn't matter. And oh, they did a profile. So it must be somebody who's got some schmarts. And basically, there's a crust there. There's surface hoar there. How far down is the surface hoar? Wow, the surface hoar is way the heck down, and that's 3 millimeter surface hoar. So you can look at that kind of stuff. Who can submit to the MIN? Anybody. Doesn't matter what your level is, and you get coached through various terms that you can use. Where did we ride? What did we find? Was there any cracking or womping? And this is, in this year of COVID, is going to be super helpful for forecasters because a lot of heli ski and cat ski operations have shut down. For example, Canadian Mountain Holidays, their operations are basically shut down right now when they'd normally be going full tilt. And they're doing that because of COVID. Pretty hard to distance from people when you're all staying in the same lodge. Anyway, you've probably all been to this part before. And you can click on the forecast and it'll take you to the forecast. The other thing I usually look at when I'm really quickly going through all this stuff at 800 miles an hour, I'll go through it about 10 times as fast as what we're going now because I'm yakking and talking. I'll take a quick look at the blog and see if there's anything recent in the forecaster's blog. Click on it and see what the forecaster has to say. Western Canada storm warning from about 5 days ago. That's a little bit old. Then I look at the avalanche bulletin. This is what it was yesterday. I'm just going to refresh it because I have these pre-clicked. So the avalanche hazard went from 444 to 333. It's gone to considerable, which still means there's a considerable risk of you triggering an avalanche. Of course, you're going to go through all of the problems and where their location is. Great, super good. And the other thing you really want to do is basically take a look at the forecast details. So they're confirming what we've seen. No new snow over the next few days. On Wednesday, the northwest winds will pick up in the afternoon into the strong range at 3,000 meters. Temperatures will go to minus 15 in some areas Wednesday morning, and alpine temperatures slightly warmer. Okay, fair enough. So while I'm cruising through all this stuff, I usually do check what's the closest forecast to where I am with Environment Canada, realizing that the town sites are nothing like what's going on here. But when I see this sun, that's basically confirming what we saw in all of our other stuff. And the temps in the town site, still relatively warm. Looks like -4 in Banff, but -15 in the Alpine. What else do I look at? Well, the MCR is now folded into the MIN. So if you're looking at the MIN, you've got the MCR. If you like the MCR format, great. And you can just click and see what other people have been saying about skiing or riding in various places. First thing I usually look at is what's the date on them. And you can get this to show as a list, or you can get this to show on the map like this. Another one I use a ton, really, really quickly, snow-forecast.com. And this gives you snow forecasts for ski resorts and commercial backcountry lodges and heli ski lodges. All right. So if I'm going to be ski touring north of Lake Louise, I'll often look at what's going on in Lake Louise. Let me see if I can refresh this and get a slightly more up-to-date one. Yeah, only mildly more up-to-date. Okay. And on the upper left here on my screen, I can specify 3 different elevations. Oh, that didn't work. Did I accidentally click it to go back? There we go. I can specify at 3 different elevation ranges for my forecast for each one of the resorts, the base, mid-mountain, and summit. And then I'll look down and see what the temperatures, the wind, and so forth are that's going on. What's really neat, and you'll just have to bear with me for just a second here, when I go into BC, Look at this. Amiskwi Lodge, for example, Battle Abbey, CMH, all of their lodges are in here. And this is all free. David Henry Lodge up north by Jasper. Fernie, whole pile of places. And whenever I'm going to the Wapta, I usually go, what's going on at Mistea Lodge? And my friend Dave Burney owns Mistea Lodge. And he says that the snow forecast for Mistea Lodge is usually pretty darn good. So they'll give us kind of a map of where it's going to snow, winds and temperatures at various elevations and stuff like that. You can use snow forecast for free. There is a premium membership, if you will, where you pay and then you can get 12-day forecasts and stuff like that. I haven't done that. Okay, so I'll look at the big picture, and now I'm getting closer and closer and closer to where I am. And then eventually what I'll do, let me just clear the spot here, is I'll decide exactly where I'm going. And I'll go to SpotWX or spotweather.com. No ads or anything like that. This is purely done by donations. Please donate. It almost got shut down here in the last year because they were running out of funds to run this. But basically what happens is you can use your cursor to kind of click and zoom in and out of places. And let's say I'm going up somewhere on the Wapta. So there's Mistea Lake, there's the Icefields Parkway, Snowbed Glacier, boink, boink, boink. Okay, there's Peyto Peak, there's Mount Thompson, Portal Peak. All right, so I'm going up on the Wapta. This is the Onion. There's St. Nicholas. Gordon is back in here somewhere. And I can just put a spot on here. Probably many of you have used Spot, and I have access to a whole bunch of forecasts. All right, these are computer generated. All right, and the green, small dark green square corresponds with the first one. That's the highest resolution forecast. So high resolution, regular resolution, and then larger resolution. And you can click on this and you get a graphical presentation of what the winds and temperatures and clouds and so forth are going to be. So tomorrow, Wednesday, on the Wapta, at 9 in the morning, the computer is saying it's going to be minus 19. But it's going to feel like minus 30. Why? Because there's probably going to be some wind. If we look a little lower down, yep, there's the winds. And as I scroll along, it's going to tell me what the winds are for the various times that I picked. But the beautiful thing about that cold temperature is I'm looking at what's going on with clouds, and the lower that gray bar is, the less cloud there's going to be. So it's probably going to be a few clouds here and there, maybe with the sunny period right around noon. So put on your big warm mitts and give her. And there's a few other things that are really only useful if you're forecasting. How much precip? Well, essentially none. Everything we've seen so far has said that. Now, a forecaster that was giving a presentation one time told me that when I'm using Spot, rather than just relying on one spot, I should put a couple of spots in and around the same area and see if they all agree, because sometimes they don't. Okay, so I went from big picture satellite imagery, the big picture infrared, and where the water vapor was. Then I went to the Avalanche Canada site, and it was smaller. And then I went to more specific resources, and I went to the Avalanche Bulletin. And then I put a spot on the spot I was going, and that's really, really local. And then what I like to do is before I head out, especially if I'm in the national parks, it doesn't work for everywhere. Within the national parks, there are all these weather stations. Probably many of you have seen these. I'm going to the Wapta. All right, well, Bow Summit is low elevation. Vulture Peak is actually just across and behind Bow Hut. And I can see the actual temperatures and the actual winds at the Bow Hut. Oh, well, it's not all that bad. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it was only minus 16. Woohoo! Absolutely balmy. What was it doing at the highway elevation? Well, at the highway elevation, it's only minus 9. So it's 7 degrees colder at the top of Vulture Peak. All right. So this is kind of closer to real-time information, what's actually going on. Usually the lower elevation ones, and there's usually a lower and a higher elevation weather plot that are both in the same region within the parks. The lower elevation one gives you the precipitation, all right? And the upper elevation one is usually giving you the local winds and stuff like that. Now, how come Bow Summit says there's essentially no new snow? And these little fluctuations of 1 centimeter here and there, not that big a deal. Well, you know what you can do? You can go back in the archives for a day or 2 or 3 or more. Oh, crap. And of course, it's not going to work for me right now. And you can actually look at, I'll try one more time. No. You can actually look at, usually when their website is working, what actually happened yesterday. So you could find out exactly how much it snowed at Bow Summit yesterday. Okay, so there are a few other places like this. Mountainweather.ca is good for Fernie, Kicking Horse, Panorama, Silvertip, and a couple other places. You can click on there and get the telemetry from the ski hill. And then there's a really good one that you should think about, and it's called ARFI. And ARFI is Avalanche Resources for Forecasting, blah, blah, blah. And it's put together by somebody from the U of C a bunch of years ago, and they keep upgrading it. So ARFI has a whole bunch of icons all over the damn place. So I'm just going to move this around. Okay, there's the WAPDA. And so anytime you see something you see down by Lake Louise here, I can click on Lake Louise, and it'll take me to the Lake Louise ski report. There we go. So I'm just going to close that. All right. And what else could I look at? Well, there seems to be a camera here. What camera is that? Oh, that's a highway camera. They can be useful, especially a little bit later in the season when we actually have daylight before we go out skiing, just seeing what happened overnight. I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit. These little yellow things are the Parks Canada website that we just looked at back here, but they're all kind of on a map for ARFI. So if I don't know what the name of the weather station is, I can just click on it. There's some highway cams on field. There we go. That's what's going on in field right now. It's not snowing. It stopped snowing. So ARFI is another one where you want to play around with it, and you can often get some really good real-time information. Some of the webcams that are out there these days, you can look and see if it's snowing. I looked at the Nikiska one yesterday, this afternoon, and it puked at Nikiska all night. So you can probably believe them when they say they got 40 centimeters. And a lot of the webcams also have a temperature reading on them as well as a timestamp. So that's kind of the process I go through. Unfortunately for you, I have one other thing that I go to, and that's something called the InfoX, and that's the exchange of information from all the avalanche operations, a lot of which aren't operating right now. So how did I start my process? The process started by looking at big picture, and then getting closer to regional, and then getting closer to local, and then trying to confirm things with some actual real-time data if I can find it. That might be from a ski hill, that might be from parks, it might be from Ministry of Transport in BC. And then I'll go back and say, in light of what I saw in my forecasting, do I need to change the hazard ratings that they're telling me in the bulletin? Or does it all make sense, right? Because if all of a sudden it looks like it's going to snow way more than they were predicting in the bulletin, then I might go with the brakes on. If it looks like things are going to be kind of nice and clear, like what's about to happen, then you go, well, then probably considerable is what it's going to be during the day. And considerable, the fact that they're doing avalanche control on Whymper and Vermilion Peak and Simpson tomorrow means they're expecting to get some results. It means avalanches are kind of likely. You don't waste time using explosive control if you don't think you're going to get avalanches. Anyway, holy crap. So that at 8,000 miles an hour is essentially a forecaster's funnel, going from big picture to smaller to smaller to smaller. And I didn't have the time to really spend 10 or 15 minutes with every little detail on every one of those. But that's how you get good at this. You basically start with the big picture, put in your mind what's happening, what's kind of happening in the whole big region, what's happening a little more locally, what's the bulletin saying, do I have some real-time data that I can look at and say, oh, Bow Summit says it's only -2 at Bow Summit and it's only -6 at Vulture. Maybe it's going to be a beautiful day. Might have to watch for heating low down as the temperatures rise in the day, like in the springtime or something like that. So that's kind of the process. And for several decades, that's the process that I have gone through every day when I've had access to information. And now that we have sat phones and inReaches and all that kind of stuff, you can always get a buddy or a friend to do all the looking for you. And I actually have had a friend of mine basically fill out little forms for me and looked at Spot and looked at this and looked at that and wrote down the relevant data that I wanted them to take a quick look at. And then I would call them on the sat phone, or you could basically text them on the inReach and say, what's going on? What did snow forecast say? What's Avalanche Canada say, or Banff Park say for the hazard? And what's coming down the pipes for the weather? We're not really as remote as we used to be. So, ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, I've kept this to about an hour. Usually it goes to an hour and a half. One of them went to almost 2.5 hours. And that was my goal for tonight, not to bore you, just to kind of introduce you to a whole bunch of stuff. And now what we're going to do is I've just made it so that you can unmute yourself. And if you want to ask a question or say something, that's about all I have to say for today. And it looks like Clinton's already enabled his video. How's it going? What's up?
I was just going to ask you, do you have any words of wisdom with the old style, tea leaves and the tea or something like that? You know, the Alpine, is this going to work? Oh, no.
You've got a background enabled.
Alpine Skills Summer talks a lot about cloud formations and things like aircraft contrails and indicators that there might be a change in weather, or, like the orange sunset at dawn type thing.
Okay, so
out there, do you ever watch those kind of things?
Always. Never mind, do I ever? This is the area that I intentionally stayed away from in this presentation, because that's a rabbit hole we could go down for several hours. But for example, when a warm front is approaching, that's often when you see the cirrus preceding things, and then the mid-layer clouds and the stratus, and then the cumulus, and you basically see that rolling in, and you go, okay, we've got some weather coming in. It's probably not going to precipitate as heavily initially as maybe when a cold front is moving in, but it's going to last longer and it's going to stay with me, and more moderate temps and stuff like that. Shifts in the wind direction and so forth. So that, all of that stuff is really important for forecasting in the field when you don't have access to the internet and so forth. And we could probably go on for a day, literally, on all of that sort of stuff. There are some good weather books that are out there. Unfortunately, most of them are written based in the US, and you wouldn't think that makes a difference because weather is weather. But we do have some patterns that are sort of specific to us in northern BC and that sort of stuff. So yeah, watching the weather, watching for cirrus, watching for changes in wind direction, watching for changes in the pressure, all of that kind of stuff. The contrails that disappear behind jets, yeah, that's usually when the upper atmosphere is drier. The contrails that turn into big puffy clouds, you go, well, yeah, that's probably because there's a little bit more moisture. Now, how much stock I would put in that as a soil forecasting tool, you don't. But you put all those things together collectively, and they enhance your situational awareness and your ability to basically try to make your own forecast. And before the days of sat phones and cell phones and the internet and all that kind of stuff, when we went ski touring for a week, that was it. Like, you had a forecast, and in 48 hours, it's probably completely out the window. So that was totally my world for the first 20 years of my touring. Yeah.
So right now, do you rely a lot more on real time checking those forecasts once you're in the field?
Do I, sorry?
When you're in the field, do you monitor the real time forecasts?
No,
Or
not so much.
yeah,
I just develop a really good picture of what I'm expecting during the day. So I go through this whole process and I've looked at all these forecasts, and the models are saying this, right? Because remember, into the future now, rarely do we have a forecaster giving us very specific details. Often they're giving us models, right? And you go to the Avalanche Canada website and they say, well, maybe around noon or so, that's when it's supposed to move in. And then I pay attention. You go, well, the weather was supposed to move in around noon, but it seems like it's only 9:30 in the morning and the shit is already hitting. So I go, okay, the system is just moving faster than what they thought. And I'm not phoning for a forecast every 2 or 3 hours. I'm basically taking what I saw when I kind of did all of my homework in the morning, and then trying to extrapolate and say, well, does this match? Is it early? Is it late? The snow is supposed to come in this afternoon. It seems like we still have clear skies and stuff is 100 miles away over there. We can basically hang out until whenever we want. So yeah, that's the other part of it. You can't really rely on one without the other. You have to have them both. Good point. All right. Thank you all for attending. And as I said, this is the last one for the year. Have a great holiday season. If you celebrate Christmas, have a happy and Merry Christmas. And let's all hope for a much better new year. Thank you all. And
thanks, Cyril.
We'll,
Christmas.
you
Thanks,
bet.
Cyril.
That sounded like Rick Checklin. It must have been.
Yeah, it was me. I've been faithfully watching all this stuff. Even with 50 years going on, you can always learn something.
Yeah,
I agree. I agree. All right. So good to hear from you all, and we will see you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.